Welcome, gentle reader. I want to congratulate you on making a successful gamble because by watching this show, you are basically gambling, but you're gambling well. And in fact, everything you do in your life is a gamble, whether it is your romantic life, where you choose to go with it, or how you spend your money, or how you spend your time. Everything is a gamble, and that's a good thing, it's not a bad thing. Today, we are going to talk about how to gamble well.
Hello, gentle readers. Welcome aboard for a rollicking Everything is Everything. We're a little more fun than usual because while Amit Varma is a serious philosopher and spends his nights reading complex books by German philosophers, he actually has a fun side. When he was in college, it was reputed that he was a one-track mind and all he thought about was cricket. So today we're going to talk about something more fun than most days, the earthy business of cricket.
Yeah, no, I just want to say that you were like well done improvising that shit, but I wasn't a one track mind. I wasn't crazy into cricket. I confess, read German philosophers, but that is not something that one admits in public. But yeah, so, I spent the aughties at Cricinfo. I was a managing editor there for a few years, deeply into cricket, traveled a lot with the cricket team, and I spent 5 years of the decade after that being a professional poker player. And it was only when I started playing poker and taking it seriously and thinking about the game that I also really understood cricket for what it was, which all those years before that, as an ardent fan and as a writer on the game, I don't think I'd fully understood some core complexities of the game. So that's what I want to talk about today. But before we talk about cricket, we must speak about a subject of which you know a lot as well: expected value.
Okay, Amit, there's one wing in my brain that says cricket. There's one wing in my brain that says Sheldon Ross, a first course in probability. Bring them together for us.
I'll bring them together and I'll also bring in Asimov and Clarke. Why not? Because there is a science fictional element to it in the way that I'm going to describe. Now, what is expected value? Geeks like us will often say, hey, that's a plus EV decision. What do we mean by a plus EV decision? And I want to talk a bit about that. Now, imagine you have a coin and it's perfectly weighted on both sides. So 50% it'll come heads, 50% it'll come tails. Not like the Cholet coin, but a proper legit coin. And I offer you this deal that we will spin the coin 100 times, and every time it is heads, I will give you 51 paise. Every time it is tails, you will give me 49 paise. What is your reaction to this?
It's a great deal. I'll take it.
It's a great deal. Let's quantify why it's a great deal. It's very obviously it's a great deal, but why is it a great deal? Now, if you look at it mathematically, what happens is that the odds are that 50 times it'll be heads and I give you 51 paise each time, 50 times it'll be tails, you give me 49 each time. Your total profit over 100 throws is equal to 100 paise or 1 grand rupee. I don't even know if they have 1 paisa coins now. Why are we talking paise? But
I have seen 1 paisa coins, 5 paisa coins.
you have seen, okay, well done. In your time, yeah. So your total profit here over 100 throws is 100 paise, and you divide that by 100. Your expected value for one throw is 1 paise,
Yes.
right? So it is a profitable decision for you to do this by the grand total of 1 paise. That is your EV. Now here is the interesting thing. You should take this bet because your EV is plus 1 paise, but it is not the outcome won't give you 1 paise. You flip it once, either you win 51 paise or you lose 49. Now let's say you lose 49 because half the time is going to come tails. You're going to have people pointing at you and saying, what a bad decision. You made such a blunder. You lost 49 paise. While actually you made the right decision but got the right outcome. Even if you flip it 100 times.
Got the wrong outcome.
Yeah, got the wrong outcome. Even if you flip it 100 times, you're sort of you could still end up with a bad outcome. Even though you're plus EV by a fair amount, you could easily have like 10 tails in a row. right? And as we discussed in an earlier episode, it might seem to some people that 10 tails in a row means the coin is weighted. Not necessarily, because there is a law of truly large numbers that any unlikely event given a large enough sample size is bound to happen. I wrote a column about this once called "Unlikely is Inevitable," and so therefore you have those crazy runs, and you might actually lose a lot of money, many paise, over 100 coin flip, over 100 flips. But that doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. But the world will judge you on that wrong decision. Now, the way I'll bring science fiction into this is that every time you flip a coin, right? Imagine the world splits into two parallel universes. In one, it is heads, in one, it is tails. Then you flip it again, and now it flips into further parallel universes. And in one, you have the sequence HH, HT, TT, TH, right? You have four parallel universes, and so on down the line across 100 flips. And which parallel universe you happen to be in is pure luck. There is one universe somewhere extremely unlikely to form where, with an evenly weighted coin, there are actually 100 heads in a row. And if you get trillions of throws, you will have 100 tails in a row, 100 heads in a row happening at different points in time. So it's important to sort of appreciate the randomness of this. And expected value is something that I really came to appreciate when I started playing poker. Right now, for those gentle readers who are not into poker, apologies, I won't get too technical. But but I'll just explain it with really simple numbers. Let us say we are in a situation where on the river there is a um, you know, not on the river, sorry. Let's say we are in a particular situation on the flop where my opponent goes all in with 100 rupees into a pot of 100. Right? So now there are 200 rupees into the pot, the original 100 and the 100 he put in. I have to call 100. And I have a flush draw, and I'm getting 2 to 1 odds, right? Because I have to call 100 into a pot of 200. And what this means is that for my call to be justified, I have to be right one third of the time. And if I have a flush draw, I will be right exactly one third of the time, more or less, right? So if my expected value in that pot of 300, which the pot will have when I put in my 100, is exactly 100, and therefore it is a break-even call for me. But if along with my flush draw, I have, let's say, a gut shot straight draw, a couple of further outs, then that percentage goes up to 42%. So I'm going to win 42% of the time, not 33% of the time. And now it is a profitable call for me. I'm putting in 100 to win a little bit more than 100. And this is how we would typically think in terms of expected value when we talk about a particular hand. And this is a very simple and simplistic example, but you get what I'm saying. Now, in poker, you're not just calling, you're betting and you're raising. And when you're raising someone, for example, there is not you're taking two kinds of equity into account. One is what is the probability the other person will fold and I'll win the money in the pot, and what is the probability if they call that I will actually win the pot, and all the math has to come together for your raise to be profitable. Now, we'll talk about poker in detail in another episode as we've decided to do. Let's not sort of go in there. But my great realization from my years of playing poker was that while it's a game of skill, the quantum of luck is extremely high. Like the analogy I give is that, if I play 100 games of tennis with Nadal, I'll lose all of them. If I play 100 games of chess with Magnus Carlsen, even though I'm a good recreational player, I'll lose all of them. But if you take the best poker player in the world and make him play a beginner, it'll be more like 51 for 49 if you're just playing hands. So there is skill, but it takes a long sample size for that skill to express itself. So poker players are taught that don't be results oriented, just try to make the right decisions and don't think about the results. And my big learning, and this is kind of a life lesson as well, is that luck plays a far greater role in our lives than we realize. So too often what will happen is good things will happen to us, maybe the location where you're born, the geographical location, the social location, the location where you're born, or maybe you get lucky in different ways and you let it get to your head and you think, hey, I am so good. And that makes you arrogant and affects the way you treat others and affects how hard you work. And equally, you could just get really unlucky where you do the right things, but bad shit happens. And then you let that get you down, you become defeatist, and again, you let that affect the things that you do, and that, there's a part dependence there. And I think it's really important to sort of appreciate the role of luck in our lives and realize that everything is probabilistic, right? And therefore, to only sweat what you can control and not worry about what you can't control. And, so that is sort of a big life lesson that I kind of think about, that after something has happened, it has 100% happened or 0% happened. But before anything happens, it is probabilistic. There is a universe of possibilities. There are so many parallel universes about to split up with every decision that you make. So you cannot evaluate anything that you do on the basis of how it worked out. You can only have a set of rules by which you live your life and follow that set of rules and not sweat too much about results.
Yeah. I want to say three things. So I have a pithy phrase that says what you just said. I always like to say, don't judge a policy by an outcome. Okay, so we as humans don't understand probability. We make mistakes in our reasoning, and exposed after the coin is tossed, we say, oh, that was such a bad decision because it came out tails. And that's just completely wrong. A policy should be judged on its expected value. And many a decision will go wrong because of dumb luck. So we need to constantly maintain that separation. So this thing about trying to have either regret or a wrong level of extremist updating on your views about the appropriate policy is a decision-making flaw, is an analytical flaw that we see in a lot of the world. That after something goes wrong, people say, oh, because that policy was wrong. My second idea in this is that you are correctly emphasizing the role of luck in the world, and it runs exactly opposite to the great man theory. Okay, so there is a guy we consider to be a great CEO, just happened to be in the software industry at the right years. Okay, so the analogy I make when I was leaving college, I used to talk to other people at my age leaving college, and I would say, suppose you were given a choice between buying a bunch of shares in some industries. Do you think that's speculative? Yes, it's speculative. Will steel do well? Will software do well? Okay, so you've got a 30-year play on how a couple of other industries are going to shape up. And, there is a large dose of luck in getting it right. There is skill and there is a large dose of luck because, frankly, the world is unknowable and things are going to happen that will surprise us. And I have always emphasized that when each of us pick a trade, when somebody joins a company, when somebody joins an industry, you're hitching your fortune to that star. You are speculating with your greatest asset, and that is the asset of your human capital. So basically, you're placing a bet with your most important asset, your human capital, and you're speculating. So if you think that I'm so risk averse that I will never trade in the stock market, excuse me, you're trading with your biggest undiversifiable asset, which is your own human capital, when you choose a workplace, when you choose an industry. And then there is dumb luck in the affairs of men, that some people land up in an industry that just happens to work out well. So in the 80s, who could have known that Indian pharma was going to go great? In the 80s, who could have known that Indian software was going to go great? By dumb luck, some people chose those careers. And they look great. And then the entire hype cycle of the media comes in and we lionize those people. We venerate those people. We run into the mistake of great man theory that, oh, this guy is a genius. Actually, it is just the forces of luck in our life. The third thing I want to talk about is coin tosses. Okay, so it is a digression, but who can resist? Coin tosses are the classic random lottery with a Bernoulli probability 0.5. That's how it's supposed to be. Many years ago, Johnny von Neumann, okay, Johnny to all his good friends. There's only one Johnny in the world, and that's Johnny von Neumann. Many years ago, Johnny tried hard to break into this uncertainty. Those were the years of the great debates between Einstein and the others on the place of probability at the heart of physics. And Johnny wondered that, is the randomness of a coin toss something truly random about the world, or it is our failure to compute? Okay, we just have to solve the equations and we can figure out a coin, because it's, after all, a boring deterministic object. There is no deep quantum mechanics in a coin. It's just the hardship of working out Newtonian mechanics of a coin flip. And Johnny worked hard on devising some formulas and some heuristics and managed to get a significant edge, where I think conceptually his idea was that if you knew some initial facts about the coin, you could make a prediction to the tune of about 0.66, 0.33. about which side it will fall. Okay, more recently, I think it is Percy Diaconis who led a global project where researchers from all over the world tossed coins from all over the world, like millions of times, physical coins, and counted. Okay, and here's a quick summary that if the coin is heads and you toss it, there's a roughly 51% chance of it landing heads. So there you go. That whenever you want to cheat at important life decisions, offer to the blokes around you, let's toss the coin, and I've given you a slight edge.
Yeah, and John von Neumann also sort of used poker in his early game theoretical work, though it was an earlier form of poker, not poker as we kind of play now. But I want to sort of double down on that point you made about, it's not that traders are gambling or they're doing something risky. All of us are doing that. Like my initial spiel at the start of the episode is actually something I want to sort of double click on, because the point is that I once wrote this column called "We Are All Gamblers." And, gamblers get a bad name that, jua khel rahe hai and this and that. But the point is, every action involves probabilities, and you are implicitly, though rarely explicitly, you are implicitly making a judgment based on those probabilities and saying, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I buy real estate or should I put my money in other investments? Should I work in software or should I work in television? I once wrote a poker column for the Economic Times called Range Rover. I think I did that for about a year. And the first one was called the Bookshop Romeo. And the example there was that, let us say you are a young man. You enter a bookshop. Your favorite author is Milan Kundera. And there, at a distant aisle, you see this pretty girl reading Milan Kundera. Like, should you go up to her and introduce yourself and try to, make something happen? And the way one should think about it is that let's calculate the expected value of the approach, right? Even if you are very diffident and you assume that the probability that she will come out for a date with you is 10%, and there is a probability of 1% that she will be your soulmate, the value you would assign to those events is so incredibly high. And the value, and if there's a 90% rejection rate, it actually costs you nothing because it's a moment of perhaps embarrassment, but that's it. There's no cost to it. That it is massively plus EV. That every time you are in that situation, you should make that approach because you literally have so little to lose. The risk-reward ratio is crazy. Now, it is not that every man in a bookshop is thinking of expected value and making these calculations. You just intuitively know that I have nothing to lose, so, let me sort of just take a shot. And this applies absolutely to every aspect of our lives, including cricket.
I want to amplify that further. I feel we should rehabilitate the word speculate. We should rehabilitate the word speculation. Okay, in polite company in India, all too often, people think that, wise, stable, safe, grown-up people are not supposed to speculate, that somehow speculation is a bad thing. And I think, as you have said, that most interesting and important things in the world involve speculation, involve pondering an imponderable and thinking deeply about the world and having no certainties and then making a call with an unpredictable outcome. In fact, if you want a truly safe and riskless world, then actually these are like, very dull, blue-collar, kind of unintelligent, low-skill activities. Like, look, if I'm a worker on an assembly line, then my world is completely controlled. That a part will come along, I'll turn a screw, I'll move it on. That's a non-speculative day-to-day life. In fact, to do anything of significance involves judgment, involves risk, involves uncertainty. It's a surgeon taking one path or another path on a diagnostic pathway. It is a financier choosing, do I put my money on this or do I put my money on that? It is you and I choosing, should we build a new YouTube show, everything is everything or not, okay? And so on. So actually, if you wish to banish speculation from your life, then you probably want a very dull life. There's a beautiful phrase around this that helps us understand this. There are the people in the world who live above the API, and there are the people who live below the API. Okay, where think like an Uber driver. There is an API in Uber where a call takes place. saying deliver such and such customer from this location to that location. And there's literally a robot below that does the delivery. That's the Uber driver. Okay, that's life below the API. Your life is simple and predictable. All the interesting stuff happens above the API. All the stuff that happens above the API is a life of speculation, of risk taking, of understanding complexity, of embracing probabilistic thinking.
So I might get kicked out from your circle of friends for asking this question, but I have to. On behalf of our gentle listeners as well, what the fuck is an API?
Application Programming Interface. So it's in a computer program. When you make a function call, okay, so you say log of 2.718 and it grinds out the answer and it reliably gives you the answer, and the answer is 1 and the answer will always be 1 and it will never diverge. So it is the act of passing an instruction upon a function and getting back a predictable answer time after time after time. Think deep inside the belly of Uber. There is the code that fires a call, which is the instruction to such and such driver saying, take this person, take them there. And that function has to work. The API call has to work. The driver has no agency. The driver just has to do that work. Else, certain financial consequences shall befall the driver. So that mindlessness of performing is an API call. And, human beings will often not like that because it is stripping the person of agency. And so it's a very good way to think about the world. There are people who live above the API who are, all the interesting people that actually fashion the world. And there are the people who live below the API, who's the guy sitting at an assembly line turning a wrench.
And we should all be above the API.
We should all aspire to be above the API. Most of us aren't. Okay, Amit, that's a lot of fun. By way of introduction, we could talk about probability for hours, maybe some calculus as well, maybe some computer science as well. But now shut up and give us cricket.
I can't shut up and give you cricket. I have to talk, but I get what you're saying. So here's the deal. I was a cricket writer for many years, right? And I would commission other cricket writers as well as an editor. And one of the things I realized about cricket, and this is more as true of writers as of fans, sadly, because writers really should know better, is we are too quick to pass judgment. Something goes wrong, and we straight away pass judgment and say that, hey, so-and-so captain made a mistake, or the batsman played a stupid shot, and etc., etc. And a common example of this is, let us say that you have a batsman, and at one crucial point in an innings, he tries to hit a six, and he skies the ball, right? Now you have three possible outcomes I put before you. One is the ball goes for six. It affects the bowlers also. It puts them off their length. It changes the momentum of the game as such, though some could argue there's no such thing as momentum. It's a post facto construction. But regardless, the six could work in various ways and turn the game around. The other is that he is caught in the outfield and he's out, and that's a crucial wicket. He might even be the last recognized batsman. The third outcome is that the ball hits a bird in the sky and then drops down on a fielder's head, and the bird and the fielder die. Right? So these are three possible outcomes. I think you would agree with me that the third outcome is incredibly unlikely, but it is nevertheless a non-zero possibility, right? But to get back to the serious subject of the first two outcomes, often what will happen is that he'll get caught, and then everyone in the media will say, what an irresponsible guy, he let his country down, theek se khelta tha, strike rotate karta tha, etc., etc. Why did he hit that ball, as if every decision is not essentially instinctive, and so on and so forth. And that is one set of reactions. And if he hits a six, then the set of reactions is, he's taking the attack to the opposition, and all those old cliches come into play, and what a brave attacking batsman, he rescued our side, and all of that happens. And my point is, regardless of the outcome, often you cannot judge the correctness of his action from whether he hit that six or whether he got out. Perhaps at that moment, aggression was a right way forward, the only way forward, and he just got unlucky and he got caught. Or perhaps at that moment he needed to preserve his wicket and there was no value in aggression, and he played an impetuous shot and hit a six. He should not be castigated for the first. He should not be congratulated for the second. And we often sort of don't realize this because we don't think enough in terms of expected value in cricket and really think about what the data means. Now, data can often seem bland and colorless, but data informs how every major sport is played. For example, data is really big in football. right? I remember reading a few years ago at a time I wrote this piece, What Cricket Can Learn from Poker. I'll link it from we link it from the show notes. And in that, I pointed out how at the time I wrote the piece a few years ago, Lionel Messi, when he went for goal from outside the penalty box, had a 12.1% chance of getting a goal. And when he tried a direct free kick, he had an 8% chance. And if he tried to pass to one of his teammates, the odds would be different. And everything is broken down with granularity. And managers know this, coaches know this, players know this. So at a moment in time, like say today, if Manchester City is playing and Jack Grealish is just Haaland in the box, but he can shoot from outside the box. Now he may not know the numbers, but the coach knows the number and it's been drilled into him what he's got to do. And there is an expected value of Grealish going for goal there, and there is an expected value of him passing to Haaland, for which you have to calculate the probability of the pass going through and Haaland converting. And these guys know exactly what the probabilities are. It is broken down to a science. In fact, there is this new trend in football. It's not exactly new, but it's become ubiquitous, which is playing out from the back. It comes from, there's a Cruyffian school of thought, and Pep Guardiola took it over in Barcelona, and now it's really become common, where when Guardiola came to Manchester City, he insisted on getting rid of their old goalkeeper who was so good he actually played for England, because he was old school. He couldn't play out from the back. Today, your goalkeeper has to be a sort of a sweeper as well, the last line of attack and defense. And this whole logic of playing out from the back can look ridiculous, when you end up giving the ball away with a bad pass, and that sometimes happens. But on the whole, it is plus EV. And which is why all great managers and coaches today want goalkeepers to play out from the back. The old school goalkeeper who essentially stayed in the box and just had to stop shots is not valued anymore, no matter how good he may be at this particular skill. So we have similar data for pretty much every sport. Cricket, until recently, and I'll talk about that later, but until recently has been a bit of a problem because cricket consists of so many disparate playing situations. Every game of football is more or less fundamentally the same. You have the field is what it is, all the dimensions and sizes are exact. But cricket, if you look at, say, Australia on the fourth day of a match at a turning track in Motera in Ahmedabad, which is known as a dust bowl, and if they're chasing 250 with 8 wickets in hand against a left arm spinner and a leg spinner and a part-time off spinner, it's a unique situation. You don't have a large enough sample size for the data to be meaningful over the course of history. Now, I believe that has changed fundamentally with 2020, because 2020 is a very standardized kind of formats. The pitches are pretty standardized, the conditions are standardized, and it's changed the way the game is played, obviously, but also the way that we should, think about the game. And that's what I want to talk about now.
Okay, I just want to say one thing in response. When you were talking about a 6 and the change in the tempo of the game, I just had a research idea. Gentle reader, if this has not already been done, it seems to me that this can be an event study. Okay, so imagine you define a 6 as an event. Okay, and then you think of 1 ball later, 2 balls later, 3 balls later. Does the expected number of runs change? Does the probability of somebody going out change? And that way we can measure the extent to which a 6 messes with the mind of the bowler and the mind of the batsman. I'm co-author of an open source R package that is called Event Studies. So if you're going to build this paper, talk to me.
Okay, papers are now being inspired by my talk on cricket. Yeah. But let's talk about T20 cricket. When T20 cricket came about, it changed the game in a very fundamental way and no one noticed, right? And here's the fundamental shift in the game. And as an economist also, you would appreciate this. In 50, let me compare it to one-day cricket, 50 overs. In ODI cricket, you have 11 resources in terms of batsmen and bowlers, and you have 50 overs. In T20 cricket, you have the same 11 resources, but you have only 20 overs, right? What does this do? This means that you can bring in the concept of opportunity cost here and talk about the opportunity cost of every delivery. Now there is an increased scarcity in deliveries, and you have the same number of resources of wickets at your disposal. Per capita, you would argue, therefore, that it has gone up. And what this means is that the cost of a dot ball, a ball of which no run is scored, is much higher, and the value of a wicket is lower, right? And therefore, from this, we can come to the conclusion that the expected value of aggression goes up. It is much more than in any other form of the game. Now, when teams first started playing T20 cricket, they reflexively adopted the same grammar of one day cricket to T20s. And the grammar was that you pinch it at the start, then you have a period of consolidation and building the innings, and then you slog at the end. And they took the same grammar to T20 cricket where you pinch it in the first 4 overs, especially with field restrictions and all that. Then you consolidate for a while, then you slog at the end. And my argument, and I wrote this in a 2014 piece where I coined the term front loading. And my argument was that if you take the changed relationship between the number of overs and the resources you have, the right approach is to front load, which is to attack all the way. That you do not need that period of building. You can just attack all the way through, and it makes sense given the resources you have. And very often it was frustrating to me when a team would finish their innings having lost only 2 or 3 wickets. And that would indicate to me, no matter what the score was, that would indicate to me that they had not been aggressive enough. You're not using your resources well enough.
You
And
left money on the table.
you left money on the table, and your grammar kind of had to change, and the whole game essentially had to change. And teams took a long time to adjust to this. Like some teams did, like West Indies famously in 2016, they won the T20 World Cup by front loading, right? And they, of course, had an awesome team of hitters, but they would just keep hitting. Even if wickets fell, 1 wicket, 2 wickets, 3 wickets, they would just keep hitting. Now, not all teams had that kind of balance where you have so many good stroke players. But my argument was that typically the conventional thinking was if you have a good innings building kind of player, like a Joe Root or a Kohli or whatever, you send them in at 3 and they do the innings building phase, and then you have the hitters at the end. Whereas in T20, my argument was that you send your hitters first. And then if you lose wickets and you have to consolidate, then you have your builders do that later. Extremely counterintuitive. I got abused for this. I've written countless columns over the last 10 years talking about the changed grammar of the game, and all completely ignored. Even most teams didn't get it. Like I remember at one point, and this is sort of an interesting a validation of the way I felt. In 2016, I had retired from poker by then, but a lot of poker players I knew would dabble in cricket betting, which I have never done and do not advise. It is illegal in India, so kindly, gentle reader, don't do it. But this friend came to me and he said, "Ki yaar Amit, kuch, you're so good that you understand cricket. Give me some tip. IPL aa raha hai, main kya karu?" Right? This is before the 2016 IPL. So I said, "Ki always, every match, just bet on the side batting second." And he was like, "Matlab, what does that mean?" He expected some really deep, nuanced insight and all that. I said, no, just bet on the side batting second. No matter what the price, just do that. So he ignored me, and he called me after the 14th match. And he said, "Yaar, Amit, kya karu?" So I said, "If you had followed my advice, you would have made a lot of money by now." Because 13 of those 14 matches were won by the side batting second. And one, I think, with losing an average of 3.4 wickets, so won by a long way, something like that, and in an average of 17 point something overs. So won easily by the side batting second. Now here's the deal, and here's why I came up with my advice to him. It is obviously natural that the side batting second has a little bit of an informational advantage. There's an asymmetry there because they know exactly how many they need to score. So that's a small advantage, but in my opinion, that advantage should result in a skew of about 55-45 or max 60-40, not the massive skew that we saw. Why was there this massive skew? Because teams were underestimating the par score. Now, the par score is a kind of score that is required to, I would say, win or lose 50% of the time. It's a par score, that's what you need to get. And teams batting first consistently underestimated this. So I remember Virat Kohli was captain of the Bangalore franchise. And he would, at least 3 matches I remember in that run of 14 games across all the teams, where Virat batted first, lost the game, and implicitly blamed his bowlers and said, "Oh, but we got the par score." While actually, the way I was calculating, they'd got much less than the par score. Because mentally, they simply hadn't adjusted to what the par score should be. And they were thinking along an older sort of paradigm. Now, this has significantly corrected itself in the years since, because obviously you live and learn. But we see teams still making those sort of errors. And this also sort of brought me to the realization that the way traditional cricket writers look at cricket statistics is completely wrong. There was a time where a batsman's average would be a really big deal. My point here was that the average or the aggregate no longer matters. The strike rate is the most important thing. And here's why. If there is a batsman who goes out there and makes, say, 90 runs, but at a slower than par strike rate, if your par strike rate requires you to, say, score for that particular game at 140, and you make 90 runs at the strike rate of 130, that means you have increased the burden on the rest of your team to make up for your shabbiness, right? So my new sort of proposed metric for this, which as far as I know no one uses, is the batsman strike rate minus the strike rate required by the team to get to the par score. And if that is a positive number, then that batsman is an asset to the team.
And that's a number that changes at every ball, right?
No,
so
no.
We should recalculate the required run rate at every ball.
No. Let me clarify that. Let me finish the thought and I'll clarify that. So I'm looking at the overall figure at the end of a game where you have a sense of what the par score would have been, or even beyond that, if you look at all the statistics, you can figure out what a good par score on a particular pitch on a particular day would be. But at the end of the match, you certainly know what was enough to win and what wasn't. And to the extent that the batsman's strike rate was, less than the strike rate required to win, he was a liability. And if that is the case, if that number is negative, then the more runs he makes, the greater the liability he is to his team. So there will be an instance of a batsman making 900 runs in an IPL season and everyone is going, wow, that's so incredible. But if he did it at a strike rate lower than the strike rate required by his team, it was actually a disaster. It would have been better if he lasted 2 balls in each innings and didn't waste time, right? And to get back to your question, what changes with every ball is the expected value of your approach. Right? So if you suddenly lose 3 wickets in the first over, the expected value of aggression goes down and the expected value of playing more cautiously goes up. Right? Because now suddenly the remaining wickets gain in value. So that is something that you have to learn to reevaluate. And often you'd kind of do it, you'd have an instinct for it. You'd learn to reevaluate, during a game. But if you're, at the end of a season, if you're talking about how well a batsman has done or how valuable a batsman is to his team, then you look at the overall sort of rubric of what's been going on. And, that's how you examine this.
So I want to say 2 things. What you describe is the quintessential problem of all organizations. All organizations, to work together as a team, we have to overcome the conflict between personal objectives and the organization objectives. And the incentives of one person to look good as opposed to the team winning. And what you've described vividly is that the media will count the average score of one batsman and lionize them if their score is good. But as you have emphasized, that may be the completely wrong way to think about it, because what is required of the person is what is optimal for maximizing the probability of winning, not of looking good by oneself. And the recurrent theme that I think is present in all organizations is that it is the financial and recruitment arrangements in the organization that either create this gulf or close the gulf. So once a person is judged for your average runs, then suddenly you've set them off on the wrong trajectory and they'll end up frequently doing things that are not optimal for the team. So it is of essence, that there have to be the correct metrics. Okay, so at each step in the game, the batsman should be challenged with a hurdle rate that is what is required for them to win the match, and judged on the extent to which they beat that hurdle rate. For the rest, whether you look good or not is irrelevant. You're judged vis-a-vis your hurdle rate. And the second is, this has got to go upstream to selectors. Okay, ultimately, the incentives will only come back to batsmen when selectors change their views. And similarly, do you really want a plodding person for the first 5 overs who will lay a good foundation? Now, this goes upstream to the selectors. That it is selectors who have to start applying the right reasoning. So I'm reminded of finance and traders, that it is possible to recruit a star trader in a dumb way, and it is the fault of the management that hired those star traders. So in similar fashion, I would say that these problems go to the strategic thinking of the team, of understanding that, how do we want to approach our problem of 20 overs, and wire this into the HR process.
So this is sparked of two further thoughts, but I will now come from companies back to cricket. And one of them is that notions of expected value can change over time. For example, through the 50s, 60s, 70s, India was basically losing everything it played, especially if you played test matches abroad. So the approach of a batsman like Sunil Gavaskar was the team's probably going to lose anyway. Let me just get my individual landmark no matter what it takes. And that kind of became a default approach. And you could even argue that it was kind of plus EV for him because, at least people are feeling national pride that, oh, so and so batsman made so many runs and you're going to lose anyway. So there is the downside is much more limited. And I think this became, unfortunately, something that remained in Indian mentality, where we value individual records and especially arbitrary landmarks like reaching 100 or, getting 5 wickets more than other countries do. Where for other countries, everything is about the team, much more so than it is for us. And we've had instances through our cricketing history of people only caring about individual landmarks. And to respond to what you said about selectors, the issue there is that selectors are often ex-cricketers. They are from that older school, right? So number one, they probably don't realize changed incentives enough and changed realities enough, and are in those reflexive modes of thought. And number two, it is much safer for a selector when everyone thinks like that to pick a guy who will get a good average and say कि ठीक है I picked him लेकिन 70 रन तो बनाए, rather than pick a guy who could potentially throw his wicket away by playing correctly but getting unlucky in 3 innings in a row. And then you say, why are you picking that guy? He's irresponsible. What is wrong with the selectors? So the safer option might often be to go in a particular way. And I want to segue from this to talking about the lag in people understanding how the fundamental nature of a game has changed. Now, for example, when one-day cricket first came about, if you remember back in the 70s, and you were, around to watch it then, I was just a little child. But if you remember, what happened is that just as I was complaining about people adapting the grammar of ODI cricket to T20s, people then adapted the grammar of Test cricket into ODIs, right? So 200 would be almost like a par score over 60 overs. In the 75 World Cup, Gavaskar famously made 36 not out batting 60 overs. And his defense of it was, I didn't play every ball of the 60 overs. But which is fair enough, because your mindset is still not taken into account the scarcity of deliveries that you have to play. So there was this massive lag that ODI cricket took to catch up. It started catching up perhaps, if you remember the 91 World Cup, New Zealand sent Mark Greatbatch out as a pinch hitter to hit early on. Before that, teams would build all the way and slog at the end. Now suddenly it became fashionable that you do some pinch hitting at the start, then you build, then you slog. In the 96 World Cup, obviously, Jayasuriya and Kaluvithar just attacked from the start. But the middle overs were still consolidation. An interesting thing happened about 7 or 8 years ago, which is that teams began to realize, and England realized first, that not only are we underestimating the expected value of aggression in T20 cricket, we are underestimating the value of aggression in one-day cricket. Right? So before that period, scores of 300 were common in the subcontinent, but otherwise not outside. England started front-loading in ODIs. And of course, they had a good cohort of excellent aggressive batsmen. But they started front-loading where they would attack all the way through. Even if they lose a couple of wickets, they'll attack. And 300-plus scores became common outside the subcontinent. It almost became regular, where earlier it was an anomaly. And, that kind of culminated in their victory in the 2019 World Cup. And of course, they were lucky in that specific final game and all of that. But in my mind, it was just magnificent that they won because, and I wrote columns about it at the time, that they were the first to recognize that the ODI game for the last 3 decades had actually been played wrong, that we weren't aggressive enough. And they were sort of the first to realize this and bring that realization to bear. And then what they have done over the last 3 years is this phrase has come into being called baseball, coined as it happens by an ex-colleague of mine from my Cricket 4 Days, Andrew Miller. And the phrase refers to Brendan McCullum, who was their coach in Test cricket, who's a great New Zealand batsman, who was their coach, and he's known as Baz, so baseball. And their approach towards Test cricket now involves way more aggression, where they have run rates of more than 4 and over. and the idea being that they accumulate runs quicker, and that gives them more time to get the other team out and get results which would otherwise have been draws. And it's a very nuanced approach, to the extent that Brendan McCullum hates the term baseball. At one point he said, I don't really like that silly term. I don't have any idea what baseball is. It's not just all crash and burn. Stop quote. And to the media from outside, it might seem that it's only increased aggression, but no, it's not. What I think they've got right is expected value. That they're looking at the data, they're thinking in a probabilistic way, and they're getting expected value. And a great example of a demonstration of how aggressive cricket doesn't always mean aggressive batting comes from a test match that South Africa played against India in Delhi in December 2015. The 6th of December was the fourth day of that test match, and South Africa went in the middle of that day, they went into bat needing about 431 runs to win in a day and a half. And they correctly figured that it's impossible on this kind of pitch against these kind of bowlers, we're not going to manage, right? So the expected value of aggression is pretty much zero. The risk to reward ratio is not worth it because there's no reward if you take a risk. And the expected value of just preserving your wicket is massive. Over here, there is no cost to a dot ball, and the value of a wicket is infinite. And what this meant was that Hashim Amla made 25 runs in about 244 balls or something. I forget the exact thing, at a strike rate of 10. And one of the most aggressive batsmen of all time, A.B. de Villiers, made 43 runs in, I think, 293 balls. Right? And people couldn't believe it, that these are natural stroke players. What the hell are they doing? What the hell is going on? But to me, they just calculated the expected value and did the right thing for their team, even if it looked stupid, even if people said, what the hell are you doing? This is not how you play. They calculated that and they did the right thing. And I think baseball does that, where baseball most of the time will recognize that aggression is the right way forward, but it is not all crash and burn, as Brendan McCullum says, right? There's a lot more thinking to it, and unfortunately cricket analysts and writers don't really get it, and audiences don't get it either. So my plea to all sort of cricket watchers, cricket lovers watching this would be that don't be in a hurry to rush to judgment when you see something happen on the cricket field that you like or you don't like, right? There is a reason why it's happened. There is thinking behind it. There is probabilistic thinking. So often you do the right things for the right reasons but end up with the wrong outcome. And so often it's the other way around. And this doesn't mean that all decisions are the right decisions and you can never criticize. But I think applying this probabilistic lens helps us not only be better cricket fans, but helps us live our lives better. When we can stop being hard on ourselves for things that go wrong, and we can stop judging others all the time, right? And just essentially be far more equanimous and not try to control everything.
Since you pointed out that I'm an ancient guy that has been around since the 70s, I have actually gone to Wankhede Stadium with Sandeep Kotnis and been a little child in the stands and watched a match where Sunil Gavaskar played. So I've actually done this in person. And the other brush with greatness that I have is that where I grew up in Bandra East, Sachin Tendulkar grew up some 50 meters away. So I've sort of been aware of him as a child forever.
You know, a day should come when Sachin Tendulkar says, you know, I grew up in the same neighborhood as Ajay Shah. I would like that day to come.
Okay, Amit, we're at the end of the fun conversation. Now let's do recommendations. Tell us, what cool things should we be reading?
Yeah, so the book I want to recommend is Super Forecasting by Philip Tetlock and a co-author. And it's a magnificent book because I remember at the time I read it many years ago, I was thinking about writing a book myself about all the lessons that poker taught me about thinking probabilistically. And this might seem unrelated, but Super Forecasting is actually a masterful primer on thinking probabilistically. And I felt that it says so much that even if I come at the same area from another context, the context of poker, it's really not required. It's just such a brilliant book. And I have, of course, followed Tetlock on Twitter after that and followed his work, and just an absolutely brilliant thinker. So Super Forecasting is kind of, it's about a lot more than about forecasting. It's about looking at the world through a probabilistic lens and having the humility to always keep updating your priors and examining your biases. is. Like what typically happens is that, and something that the book brings out very well, is that we have all these experts on TV and YouTube and Twitter and everywhere. And experts are incentivized to exude certainty. This will happen, that will happen, that's definitely right, that's definitely wrong. And the world is deeply complex. And if you think probabilistically, certainty is hard to come by. You're always being nuanced and, refusing to be certain when there is no need to be certain. And therefore, most of the experts we value and who get a lot of airtime are fundamentally wrong, and we should not pay attention to them. So how should you think about the world? Super forecasting is a great guide, but my summary of that is that think in probabilistic ways and always have the humility to accept that there is more information out there than you can compute. Compute it the best you can and be probabilistic, and keep updating your knowledge.
As an economist, it is my occupational hazard that people would ask me what's going to happen to the stock market, or what's going to happen to the exchange rate, or what's going to happen to the dollar euro or something. And it is bracing to say, I don't know. And that is the meaning of living in randomness, living with randomness, that actually understanding finance is learning to respect the uncertainty of that beast. And everybody that claims that I know X is going to happen is actually not getting the process deeply enough.
But the truth is, with a gun to your head, you could come out with an answer, but that answer would be probabilistic. That is 70% this, 20% this, 10% this, etc., etc., which is meaningless to people. Like a lot of forecasters in 2016 got castigated for getting it wrong, because they said the probability of Trump winning was really low, and hey, look what happened, Trump won. But they didn't necessarily get it wrong.
Correct.
Even if they said Trump is 20% to win, 2 out of 8 times he's going to win.
Yeah. I want to comment on the social reality of India, okay, whether in government or in the world of business. I feel that the nature of the conversation between economists and the real world is a bit dysfunctional. The real world wants the economist to be a super forecaster. And all too often, knowing economics involves either saying, I don't know, it's a coin toss, it could be 50-50. And then people start getting unhappy that you don't know what you're supposed to know, or you're not being helpful, or you're holding out and not giving us your insights. So I feel that it's just important to get out of that dysfunctional conversation into a more interesting conversation about what are the forces at work, how might things work out, and not try to get into the game of forecasting.
This reminds me of what then US President Harry Truman once said, where he said, give me a one-handed economist. And the reason he said that was that all his economists, all his advisors were saying on one hand this, on the other hand that. And he was like, boss, I got to take decisions, so give me a one-handed economist. And you get where Truman is coming from, because he's got to take decisions. But you also get where the economists are coming from, because the world is not simple.
I think Churchill had a lament that if I get one economist, they give me 2 views, and 3 if it's John Maynard Keynes.
So Ajay, what's your recommendation for the day?
I want to recommend a book by Avinash Dikshit and Barry Nalbuff. It's called Thinking Strategically. Okay, I want to clarify the word strategically. They are drawing on game theory and thinking strategically in the sense of John von Neumann. What they have tried to do is take the body of knowledge and bring it closer to real world applications. It's a great book. I think everybody dealing with reality, grappling with reality, will benefit from using this book.
And at this point, I want to turn to our dear readers, and I want to tell them that, well done. You were taking a gamble when you started watching this episode, but it is very clear now that you have reached the end that the gamble was worth it. So congratulations.